I'm Lisa Shepard, and I am the Executive Director of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism. The mission of the CJCP is to enhance professionalism among North Carolina lawyers, judges, and law students, a mission which it has been doing since 1998. One of the ways that the CJCP does this is to sponsor this historical video series, which is a collection of video interviews of distinguished lawyers, judges, and professionals from across North Carolina. The CJCP began filming these video interviews in 2000 as a means to preserve the thoughts of these bar leaders on the legal profession and on professionalism issues. All of the videos in this series are available to you on the CJCP website and the CJCP's dedicated YouTube channel. We are so fortunate to have had many distinguished members of the North Carolina Bar over the years, and they have much accumulated wisdom to share with us. It is important to understand that the practice of law is a profession, and doing it well requires not only substantive knowledge that one gains in law school and from studying for the bar exam, but also the value of experience learned from other lawyers. I hope that this video series will give you not only a fresh insight into the person being interviewed, but also some meaningful information about how to be a better lawyer in your own practice. Enjoy, and remember, esse quam videri. Strive to be professional in all that you do, rather than to merely seem so.
We come now to the signature event of the evening, which is the presentation of the Chief Justice's Professionalism Award. And to make that award, I'll ask our Chief Justice, Sarah Parker, to come to the podium.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank the officers and members of the Board of Governors of the North Carolina Bar Association and the officers and counselors of the North Carolina State Bar for your continued commitment to professionalism among North Carolina lawyers, judges, and law students. The support of the Bar Association and the State Bar is critical in fulfilling the mission of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism, and I am sincerely appreciative of your help. I am honored to be with you tonight to present the Chief Justice's Professionalism Award. This award is presented annually to a member of the North Carolina legal community who has demonstrated the noblest attributes of the profession throughout his or her career. Tonight, I am truly privileged to honor a highly respected member of the bar, one who has, throughout his career, personified the highest ideals of our profession, namely excellence in the practice and service to others. This year's recipient is Robert L. McMillan, Jr. of Wake County, North Carolina. Robert was born and raised in Raleigh. He served as an officer in the United States Marine Corps during World War II and the Korean War. Upon graduating from the University of North Carolina School of Law in 1949, he returned to Raleigh, where he practiced law with his father, who was a distinguished member of the Wake County Bar. For a period, Robert served as a prosecutor in the Raleigh Municipal Court before the days of the unified court system. But in his private practice, his emphasis was on criminal defense. During his more than 50 years of law practice, Robert has served as president of the Wake County Academy of Criminal Trial Lawyers, the 10th Judicial District Bar, and the Wake County Bar Association. He served as a state bar counselor for 10 years. The North Carolina Bar Association inducted him into the General Practice Hall of Fame, and he was the first recipient of the Wake County Bar Association's Chief Justice Joseph Branch Professionalism Award. Throughout his career, Robert has been involved with civic and religious organizations in Raleigh. He served as a Boy Scout Troop Scoutmaster, for which he received the Silver Beaver Award. He has also served as a commander of Raleigh Post No. 1 of the American Legion and as president of the Raleigh Rotary Club. Robert is a lifelong member of Pullen Memorial Baptist Church, where he has served as a deacon and Sunday school teacher over the years. His wife, Virginia Maynard McMillan, is now deceased, but his 6 children, some of his grandchildren, other family members, lifelong friends, and colleagues are here to share this evening with him. Robert's leadership of the bar, his dedication in mentoring young lawyers, and his representation of his clients with integrity and excellence have made him a pillar of the legal community and earned him the respect and admiration of his fellow lawyers. Throughout his stellar career, Robert has demonstrated the highest professional standards and has set an extraordinary example for all attorneys by his selfless dedication and commitment to the law, the legal profession, and his fellow citizens. He is a caring friend to those in need. On behalf of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism, Wade and Roger Smith interviewed Robert for the historical video series. The video was filmed at Riverton, North Carolina, on the Lumbee River, a place that is dear to Robert and his family. The entire video is about 1 hour long, but I wanted you to see a portion of it tonight to catch a better glimpse of this extraordinary man and his remarkable career. Having seen this video, you can understand why I am indeed honored and privileged to present the 2011 Chief Justice's Professionalism Award to Robert McMillan. Robert, thank you for all you've done. Congratulations.
The Chief Justice asked me if I were going to make a few remarks. I said, yes, I am. And they will be few. Now, when I pull this document out of my pocket, it may alarm you, and you may feel, good Lord, he's going to make a long speech. The reason I've written it out is so that I won't make a long speech. But I do want to cover a few points. And pardon me if it sounds a little stilted, but I'll do the best I can. Thank all of you so very much. I am humbled, I'm pleased, and I am appreciative. To the Chief Justice and to this selection committee, I am eternally gratified. Thanks also to Mel Wright and his staff and the other members who have and other persons who have contributed to this evening's presentation. In accepting this award, I'm compelled to comment upon persons whose absence I regret. Many, but not all, of my family members are here. My family, immediate family, consists of 31 persons. That's a lot of people. I think about 24 of them are here tonight, I'm not sure. But if you look around and see some beautiful young ladies who are unaccompanied, that's part of my family. But they did not get the good looks from me. But anyhow, they've got them, fortunately. Some of my peers at the bar, including Ed Hipp, Wright Dixon, Ray Briggs, John Jordan, and Charles Blanchard, were not able to be here for various reasons, many of whom are not able to come. Roger Smith is not here tonight. I say that with great regret. Roger is as dear a friend as any I have in the world. Roger is the only person who has ever written to me a poem dedicated to me. And if I may say so, it is a beautiful, beautiful, moving poem. And Roger has heard me say it many times. And believe it or not, Roger Smith is a poet. I have a poem that he wrote, and it's entitled Spring Lizard. Now, only a poet could write a poem about a spring lizard, but Roger Smith did. He recently had a serious fall, and he's suffering, and we all sympathize with him and wish him well. Now I wish some of my departed friends could be here, and this is on a personal note. Many of you know about the recent passing of a great, great, great lawyer in Raleigh, William Jocelyn. He recently died. My dear friend Spencer Barrow is gone. Justice John Webb, a cousin and dear friend, is gone. Tom Ferris, Melville Broughton, Ruffin Bailey, Clyde Douglas III, Carl Churchill, Al Lloyd, and Charlie Grimes. Of course, I have many other friends who've passed on, but they are such special friends, I wanted to take this opportunity to refer to them. Bonds of love and friendship tie them to me, and while oftentimes they were adversaries, they always remained dear, dear friends. Now, I have the next session, anecdotes. Now, I could give you all a lot of anecdotes, and I guarantee you, you would enjoy them all, but we don't have time. But I am going to tell 2 anecdotes of my own, and 1 anecdote about none other than His Eminence, the senior brother of Roger Dodger Smith, Wade Smith. But at any rate, within 3 months of the time I was licensed to practice law, it would have been in the fall of 1949. During that summer, I had clerked for my father, or rather been a gopher for my father, but I passed the bar, and I had worked on a brief in a will case, and my father and his partner, Clyde Douglas Sr., said, well, let Robert present the argument. So I presented the argument at the Supreme Court, and believe it or not, that was the first case I ever tried anywhere, an argument in the Supreme Court. And I presented my argument, and that afternoon, on Federal Street, Justice Wallace Windburn was walking down the street to the hotel, Sirwald Hotel. He was later Chief Justice, of course, but he stopped me on the street, and he said, McMillan? I said, yes, sir. You made a good presentation in court today. Well, all of you who are lawyers, the people who are non-lawyers might not realize how significant that was in the life of a brand new lawyer to hear a justice of the state Supreme Court make a pleasant, complimentary remark to the young lawyer. Now, this is my advice to the judges here. If you want to be remembered forever, make a pleasant comment to a brand new lawyer. He will never forget you, and so far as I'm concerned, later Chief Justice Wallace Windburn was a far greater Chief Justice than was Chief Justice John Marshall. Now, I've got one other personal anecdote, if I can find it. Oh, yes. The first case I ever tried in the court, other than the Supreme Court, was in the Raleigh Municipal Court. And my dear, dear friend, whom I've listed as one of those I miss so much, Al Lloyd, was the prosecutor of the Raleigh District Court. My father and his partner, Mr. Clyde Douglas Sr., had been employed by a man named Theodore Roosevelt Smith. Now, this is no invasion of privacy because there must have been 100 people in Raleigh at that time named Theodore Roosevelt Smith. But not Franklin Roosevelt, it was too soon. for the Franklin Roosevelt man to be in court. But at any rate, Theodore Roosevelt Smith had been assaulted by a man. These two men were fighting over the same lady friend. And Theodore Roosevelt Smith's rival jumped out from a bush with a stick and beat up Theodore Roosevelt Smith. And that was not a simple assault, that was a secret assault with a deadly weapon. So that was a general misdemeanor. Anyway, my father and his partner were employed to represent Theodore Roosevelt Smith in the criminal prosecution in hopes of getting compensated for the hospital costs. Well, somehow or another, he paid them $200. And they palmed him off on me, or palmed me off on him, I should say. And I went to court. And I told Mr. Lloyd, I said, Mr. Lloyd, I would like to appear with you as private prosecution against this defendant. He said, okay. And those who remember Al Lloyd, Wade Smith does, well, Al pulled out a cigar, said, I'll go smoke a cigar, you prosecute the case. And he said, who's defending it? I said, this fellow Armistead Maupin. And Armistead was a little bit older than I and had already practiced law some, and he was pretty bombastic, and I might have bowed down to him. But Alphonse said, don't worry about him a bit. You can holler just as loud as he can holler. And I hollered just as loud as Armistead hollered, and the defendant was convicted. And the defendant was given 6 months in jail, suspended on condition that he pay $200 compensation to Theodore Roosevelt Smith, who had already paid my father $200 for the case. And the defendant opted to serve 6 months rather than paying $200 hospital bill. So not only was my client out his $200 lawyer fee, he had to pay the hospital bill too. Now, I'm getting down here to all of you around here see Mr. Wade Marvin Smith. He's one of the greatest men I've ever known. I say that without any hesitation. And one of the dearest friends I've ever had and ever hope to have. And there's no finer lawyer in North Carolina with one possible exception. The possible exception is his brother Roger. But at any rate, Wade was once, believe it or not, an eager beaver young fella with just so eager, so charged. He still charges, but he was just eager to learn, eager to learn, eager to learn. So he went with me to the state prison, which at that time was substituted for the Wake County Courthouse while they were destroying the old one and building the new one. And a man was talking to me and Wade about representing him for murder. But at any rate, I had done a lot of preaching to Wade as he was coming along. I was a little bit older, a lot older, but that's all right. I said, now Wade, don't ever guarantee anything to anybody in a criminal case. Whatever they say, don't guarantee anything. Well, I gave him a lot of other advice too, but I just pounded that, don't guarantee, don't guarantee, don't guarantee. Well, anyway, this man saw us and we were talking to him in the lockup. He was charged with murder, second offense. That's pretty serious. Second offense drunk driving is serious, but it's not as serious as second offense murder. But anyhow, I said, Mr. Smith and I will represent you for $1,500. And some of you later lawyers might say, Lord, is that all? That was a good fee. $1,500 representing the man for murder, second offense. He said, $1,500? What can you do for me? I said, well, you want a guarantee? And I saw Wade's eyes pop open because he had heard me preach against guarantee, guarantee, guarantee. He said, yeah, I sure would like to have a guarantee. I said, I'll give you a guarantee. Wade just looked at me frowning, and I said, I guarantee you're going to prison. And I lived up to my guarantee. I believe if I hadn't had to drag Wade along, I might have sprung that man. All right, that's all. Except I've got some advice. This is to lawyers, judges, and citizens. Law, like teaching and ministry and medicine, is an honored profession, and it's honorable. It may not always be honored, but it is an honorable profession. Because a true lawyer is answering a call or a mission. This mission is to serve the rule of law. Liberty under the law is true Americanism. Some say that a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage is the American dream. That is not true. The American dream is liberty under the law. Some people say that safety and security are so important that we can take shortcuts with the rule of law. That is not true. The American dream initially, always, and present, and always will be liberty under the law, and that is the mission of all lawyers, all judges, all courts, and it is the mission of all good citizens. And don't ever forget that. And I've enjoyed the evening more than anybody else here, and I appreciate this a great, great deal. And I hope Wade will tell Roger that I said, Roger, you're probably better than Wade.
I'm Roger Smith, a lawyer from Raleigh. I'm here with my brother Wade Smith, also a lawyer from Raleigh, and we're standing on either side of Robert L. McMillan Jr. We have come here to interview Mr. McMillan as a part of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism's historical video series.
And we've come to Scotland County, North Carolina, to Riverton, to the place from which Robert McMillan sprang. And we've been talking with Robert as we sat along the edge of the Lumber River, or as Robert would call it, the Lumbee River.
Robert, you've heard Wade describe this as being the place from which you sprang. Do you feel like it's your ancestral home? Do you
Yes.
feel roots here?
Absolutely. Would you like me to elaborate?
Yes, I would.
All right. I was born and raised in Raleigh, but in the summer of 1931, I came down and spent the summer with my 3 unmarried aunts in the old McMillan home place that we've passed on the way down to the river. And from the summer of 1931 until the summer of 1940, I spent every summer down here, or 41, I spent every summer down here with these 3 aunts. My brother Archie spent a lot of the time with me. And so we spent our summers here in the Riverton community, although we went to school in Raleigh, we lived in Raleigh, and I consider myself a Raleigh native. But my father was born in this community in 1888, and his mother was born in this community in 1848. And her mother was born in this community before that, and my father's great-grandmother and great-grandfather came from Scotland in 1807 and bought 1,100 acres of land up and down this river and settled right here. And they were ministers, Baptist preachers, and they preached largely to what we now call the Lumbee Indians. But they also preached to some of the Scottish settlers in this region, but most of the Scottish settlers were Presbyterians. But my ancestors were Baptists, and I'm still a Baptist, and we have strong Baptist ties here, we have strong Presbyterian ties here, and other denominations. But I say my roots, though, are in this community since my father grew up here, and I spent so many summers down here as a young person, and I have my family that I have, my son Duncan and my wife Virginia and my other children and grandchildren, now still come down here for our vacations. And we have a summer place here. And they enjoy coming just like I enjoy coming. And so I do consider this my home. And when I leave this earthly domain, I will be buried down here at the Spring Hill Cemetery, where I have a stone marker already.
Robert, we've also heard you talk about your love for the boys of Cameron Woods and all the many, many great friendships you had there. Can you talk to us about the boys of Cameron Park and Cameron Woods?
Yes, it's really remarkable. Most of you are familiar with Cameron Village, the shopping mall and the living accommodations in Cameron Village. When I was a boy, there was no Cameron Village in Raleigh. From Park Drive to Williamson Drive was a solid block of woods, and it went from St. Mary Street to Oberlin Road. And so there were scores and scores and scores of acres of woodland right there, and my father and mother had a home on Park Drive abutting those woods. And the children in the Cameron Park neighborhood had the great blessing and great advantage of those woods. And we played cowboys and Indians in those woods. We dammed up the streams in those woods. We swam in the little ponds we made. And the African-American children from Oberlin also enjoyed those woods. Everybody enjoyed those woods. And my friends, I can list them: Billy Ragland, Forrest Shuford, Billy Simpson, Jimmy Reeves, Vernon Jeter, James Mitchell, Hinky Jocelyn, William Jocelyn, Robert Little, and the list just goes on and on and on. And all the children, boys and girls in Cameron Park, enjoyed playing in the Cameron Woods. And there was an open area in the Cameron Woods, which was right where the Cameron Village Library now is, called the White Grounds. And for some reason, it was a barren piece of land, no trees, no nothing, white sand. And we used that as a baseball field and as a football field. We also had the advantage of the parks in Cameron Park. And why all developers don't leave parks, I don't understand. One of the great blessings of the Cameron Park neighborhood in Raleigh is the long green park between West Park Drive and East Park Drive. And children have always, for generations, used that as playgrounds. And not the least among which was this Scotty Hoke, who became a great golf player on the pro ranks. He learned to play golf in that green area. The Jocelyn boys and Hinky Jocelyn, the youngest Jocelyn boy, all were great athletes, and Hinky was a great athlete. They learned baseball and football in that park. And so, and the girls in the neighborhood enjoyed playing too, the woods and the park.
Robert, you grew up there, and you went. Where did you go to for elementary school?
Well, before I went to elementary school, to show you how well educated I am, I went to Miss Lully Busby's kindergarten.
Well, tell about that.
Well, it was wonderful. Miss Lully Busby's kindergarten had children from all over Raleigh, and we went up there. And like in school, my best course in all schools that I've ever attended has been recess. And in kindergarten, my best course was punching cookies. And I excelled at punching cookies in Miss Lully's kindergarten. And we also had little square garden plots, and that's where I got my first taste of gardening, and I've always loved gardening. And Miss Lully gave each child a little square of about a yard by a yard by a yard. We plant daffodils, and we plant vegetables, a little bit of spinach, a few little things like that. And so the two things I remember from Miss Lully's kindergarten are punching cookies and the little garden. Well, and the best friend I had growing up was a boy named Jimmy Reeves. And I'll tell you how I met Jimmy. And Jimmy was the smartest person I ever met anywhere. Unfortunately, he died years ago in an industrial accident. He was electrocuted when he was working on a building, and he was standing in water and turned a switch and it killed him. But at any rate, in the third grade, after recess, the bell had rung. I was going in from recess, and I walked around the corner of a building, and a little boy bowed up like this, says, "Do you want to fight?" I said, "No, I don't want to fight." He said, "Okay." And that was Jimmy Reeves. He became my best friend. We never did fight. But then I did go to Broughton. And
And at Broughton, you were there with most of the people from your neighborhood. the
yes,
young
and,
men you
and also
named.
we met also people from the Lewis School area, the Fred O School area, and the Hayes Barton School area. Myrtle Underwood is the name of it now. So I met boys and girls from all over Raleigh and made many friends. Charlie Blanchard, Grover Dillon, Courtney Edgerton, Cyrus King from West Raleigh, Bill Baker from West Raleigh, and from Lewis School I met good friends too. And I made a lot of friends in Broughton School, all in addition to the Wiley School friends.
At some point, you finished up at Broughton, and what
Right.
did you do then?
when I left Broughton and I entered Wake Forest College. And
And that was at the old campus.
in the town of Wake Forest, and there was no question about where I was going to college. I mean, nobody ever said go to Wake Forest, anything else. But my brother had been there, my father had gone there, his father had gone there until he led a student revolution at Wake Forest before the Civil War and transferred to Chapel Hill. The Philomathean Literary Society at Wake Forest felt that they were being mistreated by the faculty, and my grandfather, Archibald Alexander McMillan, was a member of the Philomathean Literary Society, and the whole Literary Society left Wake Forest and went to Chapel Hill. And he finished Chapel Hill and went to the Civil War. But at any rate, but a long family tradition of Wake Forest. But I think the reason my father and his two brothers went to Wake Forest was the influence of John Charles McNeill, who was a next-door neighbor. He went to Wake Forest, and he was sort of the golden boy of this community and the hero of the boys, the Sunburnt boys. And so my father and his two brothers and all the young men in the Riverton community went to Wake Forest, I think largely because of John Charles McNeill. And my father went there even though his father had finished at Chapel Hill. But so I went to Wake Forest College.
Let's pause for a moment in the story and ask about John Charles McNeill.
That's a
This
great
would
idea.
be a good place. His life has influenced you greatly, and
Yes.
tell us a little bit more about John Charles McNeill, please.
Well, he was a brilliant person, a brilliant man, and he was a relative. He had, the families down here intermarried. There's no incest, but there's a lot of, you wonder why there's no incest, but they managed not to have incest, but they sure did intermarry. And he has Johnson blood in me, like I've got Johnson blood in me, and I've got McMillan blood. He didn't have any McMillan blood, but he did have Johnson blood. He also had Livingston blood and McNeill blood, but I don't have any of those. But John Charles McNeill and my family share Johnson blood. But at any rate, he was a brilliant person, very handsome, and he was my father's hero, largely. He gave my father a book of Robert Burns poems when my father was 13 years old because my father had memorized Burns' poem, Tam O'Shanter. And at any rate, John Charles McNeill wrote poetry, beautiful, beautiful poetry. He also wrote poetry in the vernacular of the African American people, and it's not politically acceptable today, but it was well done. But he wrote other poetry that was really beautiful, you know, the Sunburnt Boys.
And he was the poet laureate of North Carolina.
Yes,
at
and
least
he
for some
received
point.
the Patterson Cup from Theodore Roosevelt.
Now, Robert, at some point, the Marines, the United States Marines, claimed you. Can you tell us about that? When that happened, and where were you at the time they claimed you?
It's funny about life. I fought my brother every day. I reckon you and Roger fought. I don't
I
know.
don't think so, do you?
I think so.
But he could beat me. But I always wanted to whip him, but I never could. Sit on top and I'd laugh at me, and I'd just be angry. But he could beat me. But he joined the Marines. He finished Wake Forest College. He joined the Marines. I entered Wake Forest College, and not long after I entered Wake Forest, I enlisted in the Marines. But I finished 2 years at Wake Forest. But I joined the Marines because he was in the Marines. So, and I served in the Marines. I became an officer shortly before the end of the war, and I went overseas. And without discussing the morality of the situation,
The A-bomb saved my life, no question about that, because I was in a unit that was ready to invade Japan, and the A-bomb ended the war. And of course, there are great questions, the morality of the bomb and all that, but I don't think about the morality, I think about the fact that my life was saved.
Yes.
But the Marines were, so many people suffered horribly during the war. The Marines were a great experience to me. I met the finest people of my whole life. I met people of your caliber, not as good as you two, but almost.
Thank you. Well, you went in the Marines after 2 years at Wake Forest. How long were you in the Marines?
39 months, I believe.
And came back to Raleigh.
Right.
And what did you do then? Did you return to Wake Forest to finish out your undergraduate years?
No, I had finished. In my Marine training, I was sent to Duke to the B-12 program for some Marine training and college training, and I was able to get a college degree because of that. But when I got out and I came home, Duncan was over there smiling at me about this. I thought I had conquered the world and knew everything. 22 years old, or 23 maybe, officer in the Marines, college graduate. What else was it?
Did you have a mustache at that time?
Oh yeah, long mustache. It was like punching cookies in kindergarten. I mean, I'd conquered the world. Anyway, I had a long mustache. My father said, "Son, I'm glad to see you. I believe if I were you, I'd shave that mustache." And I did. But not until I went to see my girlfriend, and when she saw my mustache, she screamed. I said, "I better shave that mustache." But anyhow, my father said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, why don't you try law school?" I said, "All right." This was early September '46. I went over to Wake Forest. Well, they had already started, so I couldn't go to Wake Forest Law School. I went home. I said, "Wake Forest already started." He said, "Well, why don't you try Chapel Hill?" I went to Chapel Hill. They had not started. And I talked to Dean Weddock, and he said, "Well, we're full, but there's a young man in the hospital at Fort Bragg who has been accepted, but they may not let him out in time, and if they don't let him out in time, you can have his spot." And he did not get out in time. I got his spot. He came the next year, and my brother Archie's daughter married his son. So it's a small world. But that's how I happened to be at Chapel Hill Law School, and it was a great, great experience. I formed many good friendships at
The
Chapel Hill
dean
Law
there
School.
was
Weddock at the
Weddock?
time I entered, but by the time I left, I think Brandis had become dean.
At some point, Robert, you met the great love of your life, Virginia. Can you tell us about where you first saw her and how you felt when you saw her for the first time?
Well, I was interested in girls. I'd been overseas with the Marines, and girls were all sort of like punching cookies in kindergarten and that sort of thing. I was thinking about girls, and I had a date with a couple of girls there, one of whom was the countryest talking girl I have ever heard in my life. I said, "I can't handle this." She was worse than Minnie Pearl on the country opera, you know. "All my life I've lived over there." That kind of accent. So I was coming to Raleigh one day, and my cousin, dear, dear cousin, who's still alive, Fannie Member Farmer Mitchell, gave me a ride to Raleigh with Smitty Little. Smitty was a Cameron Park boy who was in law school too. And came to Raleigh, and a beautiful blonde was sitting in the front seat with her hair in curlers, a bandana over her head. And Lord, she was a cold cookie. She didn't give any of us any time. She didn't like these boys in the back seat. But Fannie Member gave us a ride. We got out in Raleigh, and Smitty said to me, he said, "Robert, that blonde was as cute as a speckled pup." I said, "She sure was." And I dated her that weekend. And you know what happened? The next thing I knew, I had 16 grandchildren.
Just like that.
Just like that.
You developed a remarkable practice. It grew and grew. It became truly one of the great practices.
Well,
Where did you begin, and
all right.
what did you do?
I started practicing with my father and his partner, Clyde Douglas, in September of 1949. And at first, I did some practice. Well, I had worked for them for 2 summers as a gopher. And the second summer, you know, I'd had 3 years of law school the second summer. And so I knew some law by then, and I prepared some briefs for them, and I worked during those summers on that famous Foxy Palmer case. You know, the murder case that we're all
Yes,
familiar with the
yeah,
Foxy Palmer
sure, yep.
case out of Lee County. And, but in the summer of 1949, I worked on a brief involving the interpretation of a will called Memphis Green House. And I prepared the brief. And so Mr. Douglas told my father, said, we'll let Robert argue the case. He's prepared the brief. But because in the interim I had become licensed. So the first case I ever argued, other than justices, the peace cases, and one or two cases in city court, was a Supreme Court case. And fortunately, they ruled our way. And Chief Justice Stacy was on the bench, and he interrupted me, and he was sort of amusing himself, I think. He said, well, young man, what you are saying, is this something that you have just learned in law school? I said, no, Your Honor, I'm just groping for the law. And he laughed, and anyway, and one of the greatest joys of my life happened the second day. I was walking down Federal Street, and Wallace Windman, who was a justice and later Chief Justice, said to me, a brand new lawyer, said, McMillan, you made a good argument today. Now, I may not have, but what a wonderful boost that was for a Supreme Court justice to tell a brand new lawyer the first time he'd ever been in court, said, McMillan, you made a good argument today.
You developed a very, very busy practice. Talk with us
Well,
about
when
that.
I came, well, that was after I got out of the Marines. See, I was called back into the Marines during the Korean War. And
how long had you been back in Raleigh when you got called to go back?
about 16 or 17 months. And I just really got started, but I was sort of feeling sorry for myself because none of my peers were called back. But I was called back, and it's okay. I was only making $225 a month, so couldn't get much worse. And so I went back into the Marines, and I enjoyed it. It was hard on me. By then I had a wife and 2 children, and Duncan was born just when I was getting out. And it's hard on the wife. I enjoyed the service, the camaraderie and all that, but I got out and resumed practice in September of '52. And that's when I opened an office in the lawyer's building. I didn't go back with my father and Mr. Douglas, but I had a job with the county as a county tax lawyer, and I got paid $150 a month. And it was a wonderful job because all I did was sign the pleadings. Miss Moselle Baker and Mr. Burke Little, who didn't do anything, were running the office, but Miss Moselle did it all, and I'd sign the documents and do whatever had to be done, and I got $150 a month for that. And that enabled me to strike out on my own. And I had an office in the lawyer's building, and I just did a variety of things, and people would help me. And Melville Broughton was prosecutor of the city court at that time, and he helped me. The prosecutor, you know, people called upon him, and he said, well, I can't handle it, but you go see so-and-so. And Melville called upon me. And Melville called upon me to assist him as assistant prosecutor, and that helped me. It was no money much, but I got paid, I think, $14 a day as an assistant prosecutor, as long as his vacation lasted. So, but I only got paid $14 a day during his vacation time. But I was glad to substitute for him anytime because it enabled me to make a presence. A lawyer couldn't advertise. And I got acquainted with the police, I got acquainted with the lawyers, I got acquainted with the judges and the public. And so it just gradually grew, but it grew slowly and not very much remuneration, but it provided. But I enjoyed very much. I enjoyed very much working. It's hard work, as you all know, and it's demanding work and hectic work, as Duncan certainly knows, but I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the camaraderie and the people. And I formed many friendships among the police officers. I formed many friendships among lawyers. I formed friendships among
Bondsman?
Oh yeah.
Mr. Porter,
Seymour
Willie
Porter.
Glenn?
Seymour Porter was a bail bondsman. Now, bail bondsmen have an ugly name, but Seymour Porter funneled work to me time after time after time after time, and I will add this: you hear rumors of bail bondsmen funneling work to lawyers with a kickback. Never a kickback with Seymour Porter. He did it out of pure friendship. He also did it because he had a certain clientele. He wanted his clientele to get represented, and I did my best for him. And I'd like to tell one story, an anecdote.
Please do.
I could go a week without stopping. But Seymour Porter referred an African American woman from Wagram to see me. Her name was Ada McMillan. She was charged with killing James McMillan, her beloved husband, and she killed him. And she was charged, believe it or not, with murder. And Judge Burgwin heard the case, and well, at any rate, I went to see her in Wake County Jail. Mr. Porter asked me to go see her. And I said, well, I'll charge you $500. She said, well, I'll pay you $60. She paid me $60. They called the case for trial. I tried it. She got out, got free. She worked in a laundry, and her payday was Tuesday. And every Tuesday, until $500 was paid, she brought me $5. And she finally came in one day and said, Lawyer, how much I owe you? I said, well, $5 a whack for a year and a half, a week. Hard to figure. I said, well, I did keep a record. I said, $15, I think. She said, well, I think I've paid you out. I said, okay, we'll call it even. Okay. Fast forward about a year. I saw Ada in court one day. She was about 55 years old, been driven hard and put up with, rough-looking woman, but my buddy, good friend. I'd gotten right of a murder case. And she's a lawyer, wanted to meet somebody. She carried me over there. I saw a fine-looking young man, about 30 years old, and she was about 55. She said, I'm going to marry this sweet thing. I said, what? She said, I want you to meet him. He's my fiancé. We're going to get married. She introduced me to him. I turned to him. I said, son, you better not marry this woman. She'll kill you. Well, I mean, you could read the handwriting on the wall. He was not going to stay with that woman. He was going to run around on her, and that's why she killed her first husband, for running around, and she was going to kill him. I said, she's going to kill you. Sometime thereafter, my wife and I were having supper with Bill Jocelyn and Mary Jocelyn, and I got a phone call. Somebody wants you on the phone. Lawyer, this is Ada. I done killed me another one. And so she did kill him.
Wow.
But at that time, I didn't get her off. I got off in manslaughter. But she had to pull 18, she got 18 years for manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter, not involuntary manslaughter. But she got out on parole pretty soon. And everybody was happy. But at any rate, that fast forward, I think when I told the man what was going to happen, too. But at any rate, I had lots of interesting cases, a lot of sad cases, a lot of funny cases, but we don't have time for my funny cases. But I've got a list of, funny cases.
Okay, Robert, you mentioned Judge Burgwin. Talk some about the other judges that were a part of those early years of practice.
Well, I can't talk about all the judges. A lot of them I liked, some of them I didn't like. But a judge for whom I had the highest respect and with whom I had the very best rapport was Judge Raymond Mallard. Most of the lawyers feared Judge Mallard, but Judge Mallard was a lawyer's judge if I ever knew one, because if a lawyer went into court prepared and acted like a lawyer, he was rewarded by Judge Mallard. And Judge Mallard was stern with lawyers, but he was soft on criminal clients. He had a soft heart, and Judge Mallard frequently would have me sit in court long before Gideon against Wainwright. But he would have me sit in court to represent people. No compensation, no nothing. But I knew I was glad to do it, because not that he did any special favors for me, but I knew that he wanted me to do that to maintain the dignity of the court and the sanctity of the system, and it paid dividends with me. And I don't mean to say it was a quid pro quo, but I just enjoyed my relationship with Judge Millett, and yet many lawyers feared him.
Robert, I remember you're telling the stories about waiting for a particular judge to come to town.
Oh, yes.
Because you knew him well and you thought, well, let's just wait and put this case off because my great friend, Judge so-and-so.
Well, let me say this.
Tell about that.
Well, it's Harry Kennedy from Smithfield. Well, I had dealt with C.C. Kennedy and Harry Kennedy, referred cases to him and worked with them. And you go to Smithfield in those days, you got Harry Kennedy and C.C. Kennedy, and Archie Taylor was the prosecutor. Well, you were home free. And not literally, but I mean, you really got royal treatment. And at any rate, we had another judge, I can't even remember his name, I tried to blot him out, that I didn't like, but he was assigned to Raleigh for 6 months. And I said, continue the case, continue the case, continue the case. Wait till Harry Kennedy gets here. Lo and behold, Harry Kennedy got to Raleigh. And Harry Kennedy, he was not hard on crimes against the person, but boy, he was hard on crimes against property. He did not want you to steal money. He did not want your client to forge checks. He did not want anything. So I started a new tune, continued past Harry Kennedy. But anyway, we all know certain judges have certain prejudices, but I like Kennedy. He was a nice man.
Yeah.
You also have had such a wonderful relationship with lawyers, great friends, many of them, almost all of them gone now, people like Alfonso Lloyd. Can you talk a little bit about those wonderful friendships you created?
Well, of course, I have to talk about my father first. My father was a great man. He was a scholar, far more of a scholar than I am. He went to college at Wake Forest. He worked as a school teacher and a farmer for a while. Then he went to law school at Columbia, and at that time, that was really something to go to law school from Columbia, from way down here in Scotland County, before World War I. But at any rate, he was a scholar and a gentleman and a high principled man, and taught me everything I needed to know about professionalism and ethics. And his ethics for him was simple. If a question arises, you don't need to call the state board of the state bar. If the question arises, the answer is no. And if you follow that strictly, you don't need to call the state bar. Should I do this? No. Is it right? No. Is it wrong? Yes, it's wrong. In other words, remember that. If it's a question, the answer is no. But at any rate, so my father taught me that, and I've adhered to that. Some of my favorite lawyers were Carl Churchill, a dear, dear friend, who was a great lawyer. Alphonse, a lawyer, a great, great man, dear friend. Charlie Grimes, whose daughter was so cruelly killed, and her death led him to his grave. He was a gentleman and a scholar. So many others. Clyde Douglas, a dear, dear friend. Joe Moore, Melville Broughton. I just had a great host of dear, dear friends among the lawyers, and many of the younger lawyers. Of course, you two are not exactly young anymore, but I never had better friends than the two of you.
Thank you.
And I've never bumped into better lawyers than the two of you. They just.
Thank you.
I've always said, if I had to have a lawyer for a trial, I'd get Wade. If I had to have a lawyer for an appeal, I'd get Roger.
Well, thank you.
And
Thank
I'd
you,
win.
Robert. Thank you.
Robert, you're well known all over North Carolina as being a person who's mentored lots of young lawyers, and you certainly mentored Wade and me. I recall an incident that occurred early in my practice. The lawyers, always including you, would gather at Honeker's coffee shop next to the courthouse and would have coffee about mid-morning. After answering the calendar in the courthouse, you go to Honeker's to have coffee, and the lawyers would sit around and talk and make jokes. I took a client there one day, first time and only time I took a client to Honeker's with me. I said, come on, let's go drink coffee, and he went with me, and we sat off to the side of the lawyer group and just had coffee by ourselves. And the next day in the courthouse, you hollered at me across the lobby and said, Roger, don't drink coffee with your client. And I said, yes, sir, Mr. McMillan. And it sunk in for me through the years what you really meant by that. Would you tell us what that means to you?
Well, the meaning of that for me is you are his lawyer, your client's lawyer. You're not your client's buddy, and you're not your client's friend. If he is your close friend, you should not be representing him. Just like if he's your family member, you should not be representing him. And as you have said, I've heard you say sometime, his pain becomes your pain if he is your friend or your family member, and yet you cannot render professional, objective service when you've got emotions of a personal nature tied in. Of course, you do have emotions. You're concerned, you're working hard, it's high pressure, and you've got emotions, but they are professional, objective emotions rather than mixed up with personal emotions which will taint your effectiveness. But as I mentioned my client, Ada McLeod, the murderer. I don't want to have coffee with her. I have represented people I would love to have coffee with, but I don't want to do it if I'm going to be an effective spokesperson for that person. That's really what I mean.
Well,
And it's for your protection, but more importantly, it's for the client's protection. You are a better lawyer if you're not a buddy. Yeah. Now, in your case, you say, his hurt became my hurt. Well, that hurt you. But it doesn't matter if you get hurt. What a lawyer's concern is, don't hurt the client. The lawyer takes the buffeting, but to protect the client.
You've mentored not just the two of us, but lots and lots of people who are now lawyers in Raleigh and all over the state of North Carolina. It wasn't an organized thing, your mentoring. How did you happen upon those people that you ended up giving a guiding hand to?
Well, when I started practicing criminal law in 1952, the caliber of representation available to the public among the criminal bar was not good. And I just sort of felt a calling. The criminal bar needs to be more professional. And early on, I just felt a call to be a criminal lawyer and to be a very professional criminal lawyer and a high level, work hard, clean work, clean cut, do the job. Now, in that, and I didn't set out to mentor people. I got interested in Wade through the Boy Scouts and the church. Got to liking him, and it just sort of evolved. You know my great case with you. My favorite law story of all times. You and I were hauling garbage in the rain.
Yes, we were.
You were thigh deep in garbage, and the rain pouring down. I was coming out of a house of the older people in Cameron Park when the garbage men were on strike. And when I came out, you were standing in the truck singing, "Oh, everything is beautiful in its own way." And I said, now that man's a man. And I took a liking to a lot of people, but it was not a matter of liking people. It was a matter of being proud of being a lawyer, respecting the profession, and trying to do my duty to improve the profession. And let me say this too. This is something, a criminal lawyer doesn't win a case or lose a case. A criminal lawyer puts forth his best effort, and if he does not prevail, he has still done his duty. And the duty is to maintain the decorum and the dignity of the system. You're not serving your client, you're serving the system. It's a twofold service that the lawyer renders, and people don't understand that. And many lawyers don't understand that. But my father taught me that. Every case that goes to court becomes part of the common law. And if it's done in a slipshod manner, that negates the dignity of the system. And so every case, justice of the peace case, U.S. Supreme Court case, any case, guilty verdict, not guilty verdict, anything, It needs to be done with dignity, commitment, and decorum because it is part of the common law.
Robert, sitting here
But
in
let
this,
me add this.
Yes.
When I said that to you,
Yes.
I was not worrying about you, worrying about your effectiveness for your client.
I understand.
Okay.
Sitting here in this idyllic setting reminds us, Robert, that one of the features of the landscape of your life is your love for the wilderness, your love for the deep and great woodlands of the southern United States. You've walked so many of them. Talk to us about your love for the forest lands and for the great walks through the forests of the South.
Well, it's evolved. Perhaps it started in the Cameron Woods. One of my precious memories is Dr. R.Y. Winters, who was on the faculty at NC State. He used to take children on walks on Sunday afternoons. And old Fred Old, man Fred Old, that's who the school's named. He used to take children walking in the Cameron Woods on Sunday afternoons. And I enjoyed those days, and I enjoyed Boy Scout work. And as you know, I worked with the Boy Scouts for 35 years, camping, and I loved it all. I just loved the outdoors. And Turner Williams used to say, he'd go with me sometimes, and I would say, boy, isn't this wonderful? It's so relaxing. He said, you call this relaxing? 35 boys just ha, 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 ha. I said, well, it's a change of pace. It's different, and I enjoy it. But I do love nature. Look at this river. Who could not love that river?
Beautiful.
If you don't love that river, you don't have a soul.
You're also an Appalachian Trail hiker.
Oh,
You've
yeah.
hiked maybe 1,000 miles or so on
Maybe
the Appalachian
so.
Trail.
I've hiked many a mile with Duncan and the Scouts. I've hiked many a mile with you, and I've had so many great adventures. Roger and I at Charlie's Bunyan. Roger will never forget Charlie's Bunyan. He's never seen it.
I've never seen it.
He's had to take our word for it.
Yes.
But Roger and I were bringing up the rear. I always brought up the rear with the men. When you and I had the Boy Scouts, you and I would be leading.
Yes.
And we'd ask Reggie Hassel what time it was, since he was the only one to watch. He wouldn't tell us the time. He begrudged telling us the time, which is interesting.
Well, now.
But at any rate, Roger and I were bringing up the rear, going up, and went by Charlie's Bunyan, which is a place in the Smoky Mountains. Charlie's Bunyan, go see Charlie's Bunyan. Anyway, it's a knob out there off the trail. And Roger's feet literally were bloody, and you could hear the blood sloshing in the shoes. And I said, Roger, I believe I'll go out here to see Charlie's Bunyan. And Roger says, I wouldn't leave this trail if they told me Jesus Christ is at Charlie's Bunyan. And that was a night your gasoline
Stove blew up.
It was the first rocket to the moon. It got loose, flying all around the shelter, and Roger and I came up, and Roger sat down, took off his shoes, and blood just gushed. I don't know how he survived, but at any rate, people say, and you enjoyed that? Yeah, I loved it. You must have holes in your head.
It was a great night. Now, Robert, you always wore a tie.
That was Marine
the
Corps.
Appalachian
Marine
Trail.
Corps discipline. They called it a field scarf. No matter where you went, as long as you wanted dungarees, you wore a field scarf. And I got in the habit, and of course my daddy wore a tie. Melvin talked about his daddy wearing a tie, and I just enjoy wearing a tie. Now I took in a rumor, my wife and I took in a rumor, and the rumor says, some friends of mine said, this man came to have supper with us one night and said, I moved into a house where the man cuts his grass wearing a necktie. And the host at the party said, Robert McMillan? He said, that's the one.
Yes.
But at any rate, my father wore a necktie, and in the Marines you wore a field scarf.
Yes.
And I did it sort of to be a nut. And I always wore a Boy Scout shirt on these hikes. Never washed it. Always same shirt. And I wore a McMillan tartan necktie. I couldn't find it, and I couldn't find a Boy Scout shirt, but I did the best I could.
Well, we've seen you covered with mud, soaking wet on a terrible rainy day with a beautiful necktie.
Oh, yeah, with the McMillan
One of the
tartan.
great images of the Smokies.
The Macmillan hunting plaid, I believe.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was a sight to see.
Well, Roger, let's move into music and see.
Well,
see.
my earliest memories of going to Robert's house on Hawthorne Street, Hawthorne Road, was music. Robert playing the piano. It was rare to go there without there being some music during the course of the evening or the afternoon. There would be music played and music and songs sung. And Robert, I've been told, I believe by you, that when you were at school in Chapel Hill, that you would go around to various dorms that had pianos and play the piano in various dorms, in cafeteria settings, and that everybody knew you and knew you in music. How did you come by such a love of music?
Well, when I was a child, like so many young people, I was required to take piano music and also cello lessons. And and my real love for music, though, came from Riverton, and my father. Interestingly enough, my mother had worked for the great Polish pianist Paderewski in New York, so she was very much interested in music. And my father, though, was a good singer. He couldn't play an instrument, but he had a good voice and he could sing harmony. And we sang a lot at my home, and we'd have groups come in to sing at my home. And down at Riverton, there was a custom at Riverton every weekend to have a sing-along. They call them sing-along now, but we call them Riverton nights. And so I just evolved with a great love of music, and I still love music, and I play music every day on the piano.
Robert, we've left the riverbank now and come up those sandy roads that you walked all your young life, and we've come up to your cottage and sitting here on the front porch. And as we walked up, I noticed in the backyard several canoes, one of which I believe I recognized. It's an aluminum canoe. It looks like it's got some years on it. And I believe I recognized that from something that happened a long time ago, maybe 40 years. Can you tell us about that canoe?
That canoe was given to me by 8 dear, dear friends. I was sitting in my living room in Raleigh playing the piano. And I'm a good enough piano player that I can play to please myself, but no one else. But I was playing the piano, and in those days, people didn't lock doors. And someone walked in my living room and sat down that canoe on the living room rug. And there were 8 friends there: John McMillan, Kimsey, William Jocelyn, Ray Briggs, Alphonso Lloyd, Carl Churchill, Wade Smith, and Roger Smith, 8 dear, dear friends, and they sat that canoe down in the middle of my living room rug and walked out and said nothing. But I assumed it was a gift to me. But in any event, that canoe undoubtedly is the finest gift that's ever been given to me in all my life, and it has been used 4 times from here to Georgetown on the Lumber River and the Little PD and the Great PD. It's been used on the Cape Fear River from Buckhorn Dam to Lillington any number of times. It's been used on the Eno River any number of times, the Uwharrie River, the Neuse River, and on the Lumber River scores and scores and scores and scores of times for day trips. But in any event, it was the most precious gift I've ever received, and you and Wade were among the 8 dear friends who gave me that canoe, and that very canoe is there right now, and it's battered and bruised, but it's still river-worthy, and I hope it'll continue to be used for another 40 years.
Robert, we've used the word mentor a lot today, and we're interested to know who were your mentors and who are your mentors now. Who are the people who have influenced and changed your life?
Well, my greatest mentor in life, perhaps, I won't say the greatest in life, but one of the 2 or 3 greatest in life was my father, who was a true legal scholar, and he was my greatest mentor in law, in the practice of law. And while he was a great legal scholar, I do not profess to be a great legal scholar, but he was also a fine, fine person and taught me the ultimate basis of professionalism and ethics. And he was the ultimate believer in the dignity of the law, professionalism, and ethical conduct. And so he was the most important role model I had in the practice of law. There were others. I admired many of the judges. I admired a fellow lawyer, Charles Grimes, who's now dead. And I admired greatly Justice Irvin of our Supreme Court and Justice Sewell of our Supreme Court and others. And Judge Mallard was one of my favorite judges. He was a difficult judge in some respects, but he was a great believer in the dignity of the law and in the importance of the law, and I considered him as a mentor for me.
Robert, you've grew up there as a young boy there on the edge of Cameron Woods, and you were within almost a stone's throw of Pulling Church.
Yes.
And you're still within a stone's throw of Pulling Church,
Yes.
living in that same house, and you frequently make that walk from your house
yes.
over to the church.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about your years at Pulling Church and what the church has meant to you through that time.
Well, I'll start by stating now and then work backward.
Okay?
The greatest thing about Pulling Church to me, and it's always been this way, I'm 88 years old. I have attended that church regularly since my infancy. No one has ever told me what I had to believe, and no one has ever criticized me for my non-belief in a particular viewpoint. And I prize that. I'm a Baptist at heart, solid, autonomy of the church, dignity of the individual, no intermediary between me and my Creator. And Pulling Church has been an area in which I was nurtured, and it has enabled me to develop that type of life that I prize so much. So Pulling Church has been a great influence in my life, and I've enjoyed it. I've made many, many friends. And for many years, I've conducted a class in Pulling Church. It's called the McMillan class, but it's not named after me. It's named after my father. And I have to refer often to him. My father was truly a very great man. He was a true scholar, far more of a scholar than I. And he was a biblical scholar, he was a legal scholar, he was a scholar of English literature. I'll tell you an anecdote about that. When he applied for officer candidate school in the Army during World War I, he asked for recommendations from Dr. W.L. Petit, who was president of Wake Forest College, and Dr. Benjamin Sled, who was head of the English department of Wake Forest College. And Dr. Sled, in his letter of recommendation, said that Mr. McMillan was the outstanding student in the English department, which I headed at Wake Forest. As a matter of fact, he was the outstanding student at Wake Forest. And he was an outstanding man wherever he went, whatever he did, and he was a man of character, impeccable character. And any role model that I have, ultimate role model, is my father in the field of law.
One day, Robert, many, many years ago, some people came to your office who had been involved in an automobile accident in Virgilina, North Carolina. And you were kind enough to call Roger Smith to help you. What happened?
Well, this is very personal. Wade Smith had worked his way into my heart and had won my great admiration before I ever knew Roger. But when Roger came along, I thought I'd help him some, and he helped me so much. But at any rate, one day I called upon Roger Smith, and I'm looking at him right now. I said, Roger, please come to my office. I've got some people who need some help. And there was a group of people there, and they were African-American people, and they belonged to a church. And they had a legal matter that needed attention, and I asked Roger to interview them, and I was sort of busy, acted like I was busy in a way, and I had Roger go into my office to talk to this group of 6 or 8 people And I stayed outside with Ms. Miller, my secretary, to just pass the time of day. And Roger talked with them and talked with them and talked with them. And I might say Roger was green behind the ears at the time. He's not now. He's gray on the top of the ears now. But at any rate, he came out and he was so enthusiastic. He was so enthusiastic. He says, Bob, this is just fascinating. It's so wonderful. Well, what do you mean, Roger? He said, well, there are questions of conflict of law, and just imagine what we will do. You know, this is an automobile matter, but there's a conflict of law question because it happened in the Virgin Islands. I said, Roger, it didn't happen in the Virgin Islands. It happened at Virgilina, which is a little town in northern North Carolina and southern Virginia.
You've come up the road a ways now, maybe about halfway up the road.
2/3.
2/3 of the way up, and you've had some time to reflect and look back on things and get some perspective on things. What is your philosophy of life?
Well, it's from the Bible. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and all thy mind. Love thy neighbor as thyself.
And that sums it up.
That's it. Micah 6:8. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God.
Yeah.
I mean, it all focuses. The great wisdom, you don't have to be a worshiping person to recognize the great wisdom of those. And do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. I mean, that's my philosophy of life.
Robert, what
Now,
advice?
I didn't arrive at that overnight. I mean, that's a lifetime journey.
Sure.
But I'm honed in on that, and I'm very comfortable with that, just like I don't mean to be arrogant, but I'm very comfortable with my life.
Robert, if you had all the young lawyers in one great auditorium and you could say anything you wanted to say to them and give them any advice you wanted to give them, what would you say to them?
Well, first and foremost, it's a profession, and it's not a business. They need to understand that. If you want to run a business and get rich, don't be a lawyer. Now, there are lawyers who make comfortable livings, but there are no lawyers who practice law and make money like Mr. Buffett, who's a businessman. Lawyers are professional people. Doctors are professional people rendering a service. Now, there are a lot of doctors who make a lot of money, but to somebody who makes big money, doctors don't make big money. Lawyers don't make big money. Ministers certainly don't make big money, and school teachers certainly don't. But they all render a great service to humanity, and that's what a profession is. Otherwise, it's a business. Now, a lawyer who's out to make money is a hustler. He's not a lawyer. He's not a professional. You can make money as a lawyer and live a good living, and fine, but that's not the purpose. If you don't have a sense of calling to the law, you'll never be a lawyer. And by sense of calling, it applies to civil lawyers and criminal lawyers. Without civil lawyers, civilization would be chaotic. Without criminal lawyers to defend people charged with crime, your liberties would be kaput. And just the legal profession is a profession because you're rendering this great service, protecting liberties, making sure that government works, civilization operates. Dog does not eat dog. I've written many articles about this, that by just remember that you're rendering a service, it's a profession, and your service is really the core of civilization. Without the contribution that lawyers make, there can be no civilization. You know, the Shakespeare play says, first we'll kill all the lawyers. Well, what that, in context, that means if we want to take over and establish tyranny, kill the lawyers. First thing a tyrant wants to do is kill the lawyers and the law system. And in that regard, it's important to remember that the criminal lawyer makes his contribution not when he gets an acquittal for his client. The criminal defense lawyer makes his contribution to the stability of government and our judicial system, he makes his contribution when he does his very best. Sometimes it's an acquittal. Far more often there's a guilty verdict or a guilty plea, but he does it within the confines and with the framework of our system of justice. The rule of law, in other words,
Yes.
the rule of law.
Yes.
If you were speaking to a large group of young people, not lawyers, not young lawyers, just regular folks who are about ready to launch into adulthood and make a life for themselves, what would you say to them about what matters and what doesn't matter?
All right. If you are in an area or a vocation that is nothing in the world but working and earning money, working and earning money, working and earning money, you're going to have a miserable life. You've got to get involved in something in which you feel like you're rendering a service to humanity. Of course, that's really a profession, but there are plenty of people who are in mundane, seemingly inconsequential areas that are rendering great service to society and to humanity. And if you don't have a sense of fulfillment in what you're doing, you need to change. If you're just working to live, or living to work, I should say, you need to change, and you've got to have a sense of accomplishment and contribution to have happiness.
It's been so good to be with you today. We want to ask you this: if you could do it all over again, start at the very beginning and do it all over again, is there anything you would change?
Well, you know, this sounds arrogant, self-centered, and I don't know what other adjective to put in there, but I've had a wonderful, wonderful life. And I can't think of anything in my life that I would ask to change. Now, I've had disappointments. My wife died 6 years ago. I wish she hadn't, but basically, I've just had a wonderful, wonderful life. I've had good health. I have wonderful friends. I've made an adequate living. I've got a fine family whom I love dearly. And but I'd like to add this. For years and years and years, I talked about the great love my Aunt Nita had for me all through my life. She was one of my unmarried sisters with whom I stayed in the summer times down here, unmarried aunts. And she was handicapped with a weak ankle, and but she loved me dearly, and I knew she loved me dearly. And that was an anchor to me all through my life, because I knew no matter what I did or how I might have failed, Nita loved me. Consequently, it prompted me to do better. But no matter if I failed, I knew Nita loved me. But I have learned this in later life. It's wonderful to be loved, but it's far more important to love. I've learned that in recent years, really. It's interesting. It's sort of evolved. For years and years and years, I've talked to people in Sunday school classes and saying, oh, my Aunt Nita loved me so, my Aunt Nita loved me so. But I finally realized she got more out of loving me than I got out of her love. And I get far more out of loving the two of you than you all get. Which, that's a lesson I've learned. It's more, to love is far greater than being loved.
Robert, you're well known all over North Carolina as being a person who's mentored lots of young lawyers, and you certainly mentored Wade and me. I recall an incident that occurred early in my practice. The lawyers, always including you, would gather at Honeker's coffee shop next to the courthouse. I took a client there one day, first time and only time I took a client to Honeker's with me. I said, come on, let's go drink coffee, and he went with me, and we sat off to the side of the lawyer group and just had coffee by ourselves. And the next day in the courthouse, you hollered at me across the lobby and said, Roger, don't drink coffee with your client. And I said, Yes, sir, Mr. McMillan. And it sunk in for me through the years what you really meant by that. Would you tell us what that means to you?
Well, the meaning of that for me is you are his lawyer, your client's lawyer. You're not your client's buddy, and you're not your client's friend. If he is your close friend, you should not be representing him. Just like if he's your family member, you should not be representing him. And as you have said, I've heard you say sometime, his pain becomes your pain if he is your friend or your family member, and yet you cannot render professional, objective service when you've got emotions of a personal nature tied in. Of course, you do have emotions. You're concerned, you're working hard, it's high pressure, and you've got emotions, but they are professional, objective emotions rather than mixed up with personal emotions, which will taint your effectiveness.
Hello, I'm Catherine Jean. I had the unbelievably good luck to start my law practice in Robert McMillan's law firm in 1987, carrying Jim Kimsey's briefcase. On Monday mornings, Jim and I were flying around the office with our hair on fire, trying to get our materials ready and get to calendar call on time. More than once, Robert had his assistant summon me to his office, and I chafed at this because I thought I needed to be doing what I was doing. But I went to Robert's office as I was told, and he would tell me to come in. He was going to close the door. He was going to read me a poem. And he did. And I just chafed, and at the time it drove me absolutely crazy. I didn't appreciate it as much then as I do now. Robert teaches by example and by inspiration. I've learned many things from Robert. I've learned from him to do my very best, not to take myself too seriously, and that the best lawyers are well-rounded people. Robert means the world to me. He is my very dear friend, and I cherish him.
My name is Steve Michael. I'm an attorney. I practice in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, but for the first 5 years of my practice from 1975 through 1981, I was in Raleigh, North Carolina. I worked for a small firm for a couple of years, and I met Robert McMillan. And I didn't have a lot of interaction with Robert during that time, but I knew of his reputation, and in 1977, I became an assistant district attorney. For about the next 3 years, I interacted with Robert on almost a daily basis, and I learned very quickly that the reputation I knew about was well-deserved. Robert was a true professional. He represented his clients zealously in court, but what impressed me most about him was he was polite, he was courteous, he was always prepared, and when he was in court, he seemed to make things slow down. He almost made court move at his own pace. Robert, I quickly learned that you could depend on anything that Robert McMillan told you. You didn't need to look behind anything he said. If he said it, it was so. Over the years, I've been involved in many discussions about professionalism and civility. And in any of those discussions, I always cite Robert McMillan as the example by which we all should be measured when we talk about that. And even though I haven't seen Robert much over the years, I've kept up with him through other people, talking about him, listening to what he's doing, and I know that absolutely nothing has changed. Robert made me want to be more like Robert when I was a young assistant DA, and I hope that I have taken some of what I learned from Robert and put it into my own professional life. Robert, this award is well-deserved, and I congratulate you.
My name's Jim Kimsey. I practiced law in Raleigh for over 30 years before I moved back home to Brevard. For my entire legal career, Robert McMillan has both inspired me and influenced me by example. Robert has directly encouraged and supported me in doing whatever is necessary to represent the interests of my client, regardless of the consequences to the establishment or to self. His focus as an attorney has inspired me above all else to seek justice for my clients. Always a gentleman, Robert is the embodiment of civility, and he fosters civility in the courtroom and in the general practice of law by his very presence. His influence has continuously confirmed to me that society is best served by his description of the high calling of attorneys. For the criminal lawyer to protect the sanctity of the individual as manifested in the Bill of Rights, and for the civil lawyer to provide an advocate to navigate the rules for the resolutions of disputes, thus to prevent chaos if men are denied the rule of law. I want to thank Robert McMillan for his inspiration and his example. Thank you.
I'm Steve Smith, and for the last 27 or 28 years, I've had the joy of being one of Robert's law partners. And prior to that, along with 6 other guys, being a member of the Will Turner Hiking Club, and the 7 of us, Robert included, hiked the Appalachian Trail a week at a time each year for about 15 years. Now, I've been asked the question, what has Robert McMillan meant to me as a practicing lawyer? And so I'll tell this story. I know that it was on May the 10th because this phone message slip is dated May the 9th. I don't know the year though. I know it would have been before we had voicemail at the office, which would have been 25 years or so ago. And I walked in early in the morning, as was and is my habit, and Robert, of course, was already at his desk drinking coffee and reading. So I picked up my phone messages, fixed myself a cup of coffee, and went in to visit with him. And we chatted for a while, and then I noticed that he was reading my Bartlett's quotations, which he had borrowed about a year earlier. He would read quotations in the morning, and then if he saw something he particularly liked, he'd go to the library and read the original source. And so I said, Robert, what are you reading? And he read me this, and I wrote it down, and I've carried it with me every day since then. This is Matthew Arnold on Wordsworth's death. Others will teach us how to dare, and against fear our breasts to steel. Others will strengthen us to bear, but who will make us feel? I'm happy to have this opportunity to thank you, Robert, for all you've meant to me and mean to me in the practice of law and in all parts of my life.
Robert, if you had all the young lawyers in one great auditorium and you could say anything you wanted to say to them and give them any advice you wanted to give them, what would you say to them?
Well, first and foremost, it's a profession, and it's not a business. They need to understand that. If you want to run a business and get rich, don't be a lawyer. Now, there are lawyers who make comfortable livings, but there are no lawyers who practice law and make money like Mr. Buffett, who's a businessman. Lawyers are professional people. Doctors are professional people rendering a service. Now, there are a lot of doctors who make a lot of money, but to somebody who makes big money, doctors don't make big money. Lawyers don't make big money. Ministers certainly don't make big money, and school teachers certainly don't. But they all render a great service to humanity, and that's what a profession is. Otherwise, it's a business. Now, a lawyer who's out to make money is a hustler. He's not a lawyer. He's not a professional.